So let me tell you a story. Let me tell you a story about uncertainty. Let me tell you about a story that, Alex is here. I work in an institution that's full of economists. I'm not an economist. So I always accuse economists of driving a car looking in the rear view mirror. Let me tell you a story about why that's so dangerous today and going forwards. So we really face three challenges. Sorry about that, Alex. I always get a cheap jibe in there against the economists. That's what I do all the time. So globally we face three challenges. Productivity, 9 billion people in 2050. The thing is, those people who are going to be on this planet are not going to be eating what they used to eat. They're also not going to be eating it where they used to eat it. It always was the story of the West and the OECD countries. It was always a story about McDonald's and overeating and those sorts of things. And that's how we built an agricultural system, a global agricultural system, to get where we needed to go. The thing is, most of the increase in consumption is actually in East Asia, Southeast Asia. And what people are consuming, and it's a good story, this is the good bit of the story, is as they come out of poverty, what they do is they change their diet. That doesn't mean that they suddenly go and consume everything that Westerners consume. It's a real fallacy. You know, in the north of China, which is a traditional wheat area, they consume more rice. In the south, which is a rice area, they consume more wheat. People change their diet. One thing they will do is they consume a lot more protein. Big problem with protein, apart from beans, of course. We have to grow something and then shove it into a protein machine. Those protein machines we call livestock, we call fish, sheep, all sorts of different things. We don't have enough grasslands to feed them, so we have to grow more crops to put in them. So the world's changing. The other slight problem we have is the world's also changing. Part of the reason why Next Commodities Trader standing here now is about 18 months, 2 years ago, I dragged in by the bank to move a thing called the Global Alliance on Climate Smart Ag. And most of the CEOs I spoke to have 18-month time horizons mentally, and that's the longest they've probably got. Some are very different. And the climate change discussion in agriculture is always 20, 30 years away. I'm glad to see we've actually got a couple of farmers in the room. The reality is that climate change is with agriculture already and has been for quite some time. We were sitting on some big piles of food stocks that were driven by OECD policies, but they're gone. We ate them. They're no longer there. So we're now hardwired to the climate or weather. We're hardwired to the consumers, and that's why we get price shocks when we have production problems. But the reality is that climate change in agriculture is a short-term thing. There you can see price volatility. I've got another slide that I love to show when I'm talking to CEOs, but it's actually Tyson's share price and the price of corn in 2012. One goes up dramatically and one goes down dramatically at exactly the same periods in time. I'll let you work out which one was which, but the market knew that Tyson's was short a lot of corn. So this stuff hits equity prices, bottom lines, P&Ls today. In the medium term, we've got some real problems because the crops that we currently have on the planet will not be able to survive the exigencies in temperature, wind, and rainfall that are coming down the pike. A big part of our global food system is actually built on hybrid corn. Big problem with hybrid corn, it's really bad-tempered, which is why we keep on going further and further north in the US to grow it. Slight problem, there's a big shelf of rock just up north. You won't be able to grow any corn. So as you transition through the big shelf of rock, Canada's in the corn business. The US increasingly isn't. And in the long term, which is where we really go, this is the Armageddon speech, by the way, but this is where the Armageddon gets real serious, is that it's not clear how we're actually going to get there. Because when we look at the potential impacts of climate change, using AR5 and the models that we have today, the temperatures, the exigencies, start looking like it's very difficult for what we currently have today to grow, survive, live, and that includes us. You start smiling a bit more now. That was the worst bit of the Armageddon speech. But on the emissions side, there's a story today, right? And those numbers go up and go down. My colleague just pointed a new report to me. It says we're about 21% of GHG emissions are coming out of agriculture and deforestation and land use change. But kind of the numbers, the precise numbers, I don't think are really the issue. The issue is that agriculture increasingly is eating into it. We're doing quite well on forests. It seems to have stabilised at some level. The trouble is, if we actually keep on wanting to feed all those animals, it looks like we don't have enough land, so might we end up chewing down some forests again? Because we've reached some yield peaks, there's no doubt about that. All the scientists I talk to look more and more concerned on that. But the issue really is about agriculture tomorrow. So we've got solar panels, we've got electric cars. Matter of fact, every other sector on the planet has done something about its emissions. Every other sector on the planet has really done something to become a lot more efficient. Now, how it's got there, many, many different stories. But agriculture really hasn't. So WRI, in the report, the big report that will come out this year, highlighted that if we actually say that a 2-degree world, and let's remember a +2 degree world in some parts of the world is +9, +10 degrees, which is dead animals, dead plants. Is 21, 22 gigaton? Well, if agriculture carries along its merry way and doesn't actually change the way that it's going to deal with the planet, we will account for 70% of that number. That's a shocking statistic. That makes us much bigger than big oil. And yet we're the people trying to feed the planet. There's a really weird irony embedded in the middle of all of that. The question is, what will society have to say about it? We're feeding them, but we're also killing the planet around us. It's going to be a really difficult circle to square. Never quite got issues around shapes. So what are the potential solutions? Well, one of the things that people refer to, and let's be clear on this, climate smart agriculture is not some new religion that's popped out of the ether. It's also not a specific list of practices. It's really about 3 goals. It's really saying when we're managing landscapes, we have to achieve 3 things if we're going to stay in business as a planet. We have to increase productivity. There's no way to get there otherwise. We have to manage the volatility and what the planet's going to throw at us in the short term, but build resilience over the long term. If not, we're just going to keep on having production problems. That will drive food price spikes, that will drive politics, and it will drive wars. That's a big problem. And ultimately, we can't be 70% of our own problem, because we're the people who are most affected by the climate change. So those are the 3 things that we need to do. Climate smart agriculture is about saying, let's try and achieve those 3 things as far as possible, as often as possible, with what we have today. And let's really focus science on achieving that tomorrow. So there's all sorts of things that people came up with. At the bank, well, in New York last year, we said we'd get to 100% of our portfolio being climate smart within 4 years. I have to apologise to my client, both my clients and my colleagues for that one. But if we don't set aspirational goals and we don't get aspirational about the way that we're going to manage landscapes, we simply won't get there. What we'll be doing is talking about 10 years from now. We don't quite have enough science to do it. We have enough to be getting on doing a lot more than we currently have. So opportunities, this was one of the things everyone else said, well, what the heck is climate smart agriculture? What is this thing? What can we do? No one's telling me, which shovel do I use? Which tractor? Which drilling implement? What do I do? Where do I go? So we just pulled together something that was relatively simple, but we looked across the planet and said, okay, in terms of productivity, for example, in North America, we're doing pretty well. So that slice of the cake doesn't seem to be necessarily what we're after, but we're not terribly resilient. 2012 will tell us that story, remembering that it wasn't really the drought that killed the corn crop, it was actually those 7 days of overnight temperatures that didn't come down, so none of those plants silted. We had a lot of green plants until the drought killed them. The reality was there weren't many years of corn on those plants. And it's about emissions. So let's focus on that. And different parts of the world and different countries are going to have different priorities. You're not going to walk into Africa, which has a requirement to treble food production, and say, let's cut net emissions from today. It's just not serious. But how do we treble food production in Africa and not treble emissions? That's the real question that we have to answer. And then, you know, I have to do this corporate stuff, but you know, some examples of where we've been doing. In actual fact, this slide is already grossly out of date. It's only about 6 months old. We've moved, I think, 10 to 15 projects already in the pipeline in the past 6 months. Very simple stuff. You know, we're Aggies. You know, we focus on productivity. I run our risk teams, and it's taken me a while, but finally people are starting to switch on that we might need to actually manage risk and build resilience. Bit of a no-brainer. But the other reality is that we can do this in ways that don't dramatically increase emissions. And in simply, in those 10 to 15 projects, it wasn't a big turn. It wasn't a big heavy lift. Certainly not with the client and not with the project teams to actually be delivering on these three things. As I said, it's not a new religion. It's not a specific list of practices. It's about an approach to having sustainable agriculture for 2050. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark.